Hello, everyone, and welcome to this webinar on the second edition of the Speed Management Manual. My name is Benjamin Holzman, and I'm a communications specialist with the World Bank's Global Road Safety Facility, and I'll be moderating this event today. Before we get started, I would like to run through a few housekeeping items. So first, we have interpreters in this webinar who will be translating into Spanish, French, and Portuguese. To access these language translations, please click the interpretation button or the EN button at the bottom right of the Zoom window. And from there, you can change the language and select the one that you require. Second, this webinar is being recorded and may be uploaded onto the websites of the organizations hosting this event. So if you have any concerns about this, please send me a direct message via the Zoom chat. And third, if you have any technical difficulties, please send a direct message to me within this Zoom webinar or send me an email at bholzman@worldbank.org and we'll try to resolve it. So now on to the topic at hand. In this webinar, we'll be exploring the updated contents of one of the most important publications in the field of speed management, namely Speed Management, a Road Safety Manual for Decision Makers and Practitioners. The first edition of this manual was published in 2008. Given the many developments and research studies in the field of speed management in the last 15 years or so, a process was initiated to update the manual to include the latest knowledge and insights on the topic. This updated version, the second edition, was released at the end of 2023 and was produced by 4 leading global organizations who are involved in road safety: the FIA Foundation, the Global Road Safety Partnership, the World Bank, and the World Health Organization. The production of the manual was generously funded through the Bloomberg Philanthropies Initiative for Global Road Safety, and the primary authors were from the World Bank's Global Road Safety Facility, with inputs and quality reviews from colleagues from the other partnering organizations. It was truly a very global collaborative effort. You can download the manual from the QR code on the screen or from the websites of the organizations involved in its production. A link to the manual is also included in the email invitation for this webinar, and you can also find it through a simple Google search. So we encourage you all to download the PDF and to take a look. Before I give the floor to our first speaker, let me briefly run through the structure of this webinar. We'll start with the opening remarks from Bloomberg Philanthropies, followed by short remarks from the 4 organizations that co-produce the manual: WHO, the FIA Foundation, GRSP, and the World Bank. Next, the 3 authors of the manual will provide a technical presentation on the new approaches to speed management that are outlined in this second edition of the manual. And following this, there'll be a question and answer session. Throughout the webinar, and especially during the Q&A session, participants are encouraged to enter questions into the Q&A box. If you'd like a specific speaker to answer a question, please include that in the question itself. And you can access the Q&A box at the bottom of the Zoom window. So without further ado, let me give the floor to our first speaker, Rebecca Babinger, who is in the public health team of Bloomberg Philanthropies. Just give me stop my screen share. And Rebecca, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Benji. Good day, everyone. It is so nice to be with you today. And first, want to thank you all for joining the webinar today. It was really encouraging to see over 800 people sign up for today's webinar to learn about a topic that the panelists today care so deeply about, which is speed management. Bloomberg Philanthropies has been proud to fund efforts to reduce road traffic, crashes, fatalities, and injuries since 2007. And per our impact evaluation, we have saved over 300,000 lives from our investments since 2007. We're led by data. And when we found out that speed causes over half of the fatal crashes around the world, we knew we had to take action. And when you think of all the co-benefits of speed management, such as the environmental, the socioeconomic, the opportunity for increased physical activity with safer walking and biking in cities, the benefits of speed management are too great to pass up. We're currently working in 27 cities and 2 states across 15 countries, all low and middle income countries. And we have a singular focus on speed management in our work with these partner cities. We encourage cities to adopt WHO best practice recommendations for speed limits. We've issued a challenge to all of our participating cities in our initiative to do that and to adopt the recommended speed limits and start enforcing them. We also provide funds for advocacy groups to advocate to their national governments to adopt WHO best practices around speed policies and speed setting. We have seen some progress. In Bogota, they adopted a citywide speed limit of 50 kilometers per hour in 2020 at the height of the COVID pandemic. And then 2 years later, Colombia's National Congress adopted a law that set the urban speed limit for the entire country at 50 kilometers an hour. Over in Vietnam, we're seeing some pilots, an expansion of pilots around slow speed zones for schools and hospitals, which we know is a great way to start in cities that are hesitant to take on this issue of reducing speed to safe levels to target areas to do speed management. And in Kampala, we know that the city has implemented a new non-motorized traffic corridor in one of the busiest downtown market areas. But more needs to be done. These are great to have pilots, but we need wider scale, lasting changes in order to bring down the number of fatal crashes and serious injuries. WHO just released its new edition of the Global Status Report on road safety. And unfortunately, road traffic injuries remain the leading cause of death for people aged 5 to 29. This is a public health crisis. And with guides like this second edition of the Speed Management Manual, we are giving policymakers the tools that they need to take bold action and make lasting changes. We're so pleased to have been able to fund this and other manuals and look forward to the conversation today and to the questions that you may have or ideas you may have to spur more action. And we look forward to continuing to work with many of you in the future. With that, I will turn it back to Benji.
Thank you so much, Rebecca. Our next speaker is Etienne Krug, who is a director of the Department for Social Determinants of Health from the World Health Organization. Etienne, the floor is yours.
Thanks so much, Benji. Hi, everybody all around the world. It's, as Becky said, fantastic to have so many participants in this important discussion. Big thanks to Saeed and the team at the World Bank for having organized this opportunity to have a dialogue around speed and this new speed manual. And of course, a big thanks also to all partners in the bank, FIA Foundation, GRSP, Bloomberg Philanthropies, who funded the effort, and the many experts who worked with us on this speed management manual. It's almost 20 years, day by day, that we published the World Report on Road Traffic Injuries, which laid the ground for a whole movement around road safety. And soon thereafter, we created the UN Road Safety Collaboration, the UNRSC, an informal mechanism to coordinate road safety efforts at the international level, and really to facilitate the implementation of the recommendation of the World Report. And soon we realized the need for a series of best practice manuals, the so-called green manuals, which we started developing in collaboration with the partners I just mentioned. We developed manuals on helmet wearing, on seatbelt wearing, on drink driving, on data collection, etc., as well as one of the main risk factors for road traffic injuries, speeding. These manuals are really compiling the best science out there, working with experts from all over the world, high-income countries, low-income countries, middle-income countries, filling them up also with case studies in order to inspire and facilitate action. I'm delighted this series is now updated, and we have what is probably the most important one of all, the speed manual, which we're discussing today. We are 1/3 into the second decade of action for addressing road safety, and speed will be a key element if we are to succeed with this decade. Becky just mentioned the Global Status Report on Road Safety that was issued in December, end of last year, which gives us a glimmer of hope. More than half of the countries have shown a reduction in deaths during the last decade. 45 countries showed a reduction of 30% or more, of which 10 showed a reduction of 50% or more in the number of road deaths. These are very important and encouraging results. And for the first time, we also saw decreases in low-income countries. Before that, it was mainly in high-income and a little bit in middle-income countries. So all countries now have shown that it is possible to achieve reductions, and some countries have shown that a 50% reduction is possible. To do that, we absolutely need to address speeding. And although there is some hope in this last report, the crisis, as Becky also said, remains huge. We still have more than 2 deaths per minute. We have 1.19 million deaths per year on the roads, and crashes remain the leading killer for young people. So we need to do more. We need to tackle speed. The report shows that actually, although all countries have some legislation on speeding, just 1/3 of these meet WHO best practice. What is that? That means having a national speed limit for each of the different types of roads, highways, rural roads, etc. An urban speed limit of 50 kilometers per hour max, preferably lower, and the ability for local authorities to further lower speed limits around schools or hospitals and other areas where traffic mixes. Only 1/3 of the countries have that type of legislation in place, which means we still have a lot of room for improvement, which is good. We want improvement, and let's focus on those countries and support them to have the legislation in place using this manual. Let's also remember that having good legislation is super important, but it's only one step in the right direction. People need to know about that legislation. There needs to be information, and the legislation needs to be enforced. Enforcement remains the Achilles heel in many countries of our efforts, and beefing up enforcement, and again, we talk about it in the manual, is going to be essential during the continuation of this second decade. So let me finish with a call to action. I really would like to invite all policymakers and practitioners to take a look at this manual, to take a look at the updated version with the new case studies, which I think should inspire all to take action. This is not an unsolvable problem. This is a problem that we know the solutions of and can implement. Thanks very much. Looking forward to the discussions.
Thank you, Etienne. Our next speaker is Dave Cliff, who is the Chief Executive Officer of the Global Road Safety Partnership.
Right.
Dave, the floor is yours.
Thanks very much, Benji, and thank you to Becky and Etienne for your comments. Just by way of introduction, I too wanted to acknowledge the support of Bloomberg Philanthropies in the preparation of the manual, and also to applaud the team at the World Bank at the Global Road Safety Facility for the work they put into this manual. It really is excellent, and I only wish I'd known about documents like this in my earlier career. It is so helpful. I wanted to use this opportunity to really hone in on 3 aspects to the manual, which I think are super important, and many of which Etienne just covered off. The first one is the issue of setting survivable speed limits, ones that are consistent with safe system principles. The second is the issue of enforcement, and then just to touch briefly on the research. So firstly, setting speed limits. The habitual issue that we see is that speed limits are often based on what drivers have historically become accustomed to traveling at, rather than the science. Speed limits have got to be based on the science, the safe system approach to speed limits, which is ensuring that people travel at survivable speed limits. We know that people will make mistakes, and when they do make mistakes, when they have collisions, they need to occur at speeds where people can actually walk away from the crash. I wanted to highlight 2 particular issues. One is that, as Etienne said, 30 km/h speed limits have now really become the norm in cities and towns where there's a lot of interaction between motorized vehicles and vulnerable road users, such as pedestrians and cyclists. They do reduce casualties. We still see non-survivable speed limits on many rural, non-divided rural roads around the world. These are the roads where people can have head-on collisions or strike roadside objects. Often speed limits in these environments are just too high, for example, 100 or even in some cases 120 kilometres an hour. So speed limits on these roads need to be reduced, as explained in the guide, to no more than 80 kilometres per hour so that impact speeds are survivable. We see enormous benefits when speed limits on rural, non-divided roads are reduced to these survivable levels. Lastly, on the setting of speed limits, we understand that it's explained very clearly in the guide as to what works, and then they have to be clearly signposted to make drivers aware of them, and also to ensure that when enforcement is carried out, that it's conducted fairly. Now, just to talk a little bit about enforcement of speed limits. Firstly, enforcement works. There are numerous studies that show the enormous value of speed enforcement. It saves lives, it reduces casualties. Road policing generates changes in road user behaviour by slowing drivers down and is an essential component of the safe system. But a few requirements for road policing. There needs to be enough of it to generate deterrence. So there needs to be sufficient volumes of speed enforcement for drivers who regularly exceed speed limits to be regularly caught and penalised. It seems obvious. So we need to strongly encourage police to carry out high volumes of enforcement and to take effective action, which is the issuing of penalties, not warnings. They simply do not work. Penalties do work. We'd also encourage people to look at the penalties guide, which is referenced there in the Green Manual, and recommendations on the combinations of penalties that are most effective at deterring speeding behaviour. So, for example, fines and demerit points and some other options. Also, with respect to enforcement, we know that the mixed models of visible and covert enforcement are more effective than just one or other. And we also know that using both automated and manual enforcement is highly effective. But once again, we encourage you to look at the guide for the readiness for automation guide that was produced so all those pointers on what's required for effective automated enforcement to be applied. With respect to public awareness programs, we know that when enforcement is directly supported by targeted, well-designed public awareness programs, it has a greatly enhancing effect on the positive outcomes of that enforcement. But we also know that standalone public awareness programs simply encouraging drivers to slow down without the enforcement are not effective. So again, to be avoided. Lastly, just with the research, you'll see throughout the guide, there are numerous references to the academic studies that demonstrate the relationship between travel speeds and trauma rates and trauma risk. The science around what works to reduce speed-related trauma is very clear and very well understood from numerous studies. Our advice is to stay with the evidence when setting and enforcing speed limits. So in closing, just like to again congratulate the GRSF for the production of the guide, and to say again, there are enormous benefits globally in reducing trauma through applying the lessons in this guide and reducing speeds. Thanks very much, and back to you, Benji.
Thank you, Dave. Our next speaker is Saul Billingsley, who's the Executive Director of the FIA Foundation. Saul, the floor is yours.
Thanks very much. Thanks very much, Benji, and hi everyone. And I'd like to sort of add my thanks to the Global Road Safety Facility team for putting on this webinar. At the FIA Foundation, we've been delighted to be involved in these manuals since they started. I'm going to just briefly talk about the vehicle safety aspects of the manual, and to start really by going beyond what the manual talks about. So I think it's really important that we set the in-vehicle technology for speed management in the context of vehicle design as well. Because as Dave was just talking about, the core to the safe system is that we have survivable speeds. And as the manual points out, the survivable sort of speed envelope for vehicle to vehicle head-on crashes is set at around 70 kilometers an hour. That's what the vehicles are supposed to be engineered to. Global NCAP and other NCAPs test to just below that speed, so that you can essentially, if you have a crash at that speed, below that speed, it should be survivable. It should not be life-ending, or you should not have life-changing injury. That's the objective. Obviously, a collision is more than just velocity. It's also about mass. It's also about design, and the design of the vehicles that are hitting each other or hitting pedestrians. So it's really important that every country has at least the minimum UN vehicle standards applied in their country, and hopefully a much more ambitious policy of going beyond that to achieve the sort of 4 or 5 star global NCAP ratings that we want to see every car have. And it's important for pedestrians as well. So there are pedestrian protection designs for vehicles which need to be implemented. Obviously, those only work at a much lower speed, which is why we all campaign so hard for default 30 kilometers an hour in cities and towns where people are walking and cycling, and also why we have such a big issue, as Dave also mentioned, about rural speeds. One of the concerns we have at the Foundation is about the increasing size of vehicles. Coming back to that mass plus velocity issue, more than half of all vehicles now are SUV type vehicles. Around more than 10% are large SUV vehicles. We know that if a SUV has a crash with a normal car, the SUV occupants are likely to be better protected, but there's at least a 20% greater chance that people in the normal car are going to be killed or seriously injured. So this compatibility issue is important. It's even more important for pedestrians, because we know that there is something like a 30% greater risk of being killed if you're hit by a car with a 90 centimeter bonnet than an 80 centimeter bonnet. 10 centimeters difference, 30% greater risk of death. So this design issue is really important and something we need to remember. But coming to the content of the manual, I think the key thing the manual is pointing out, and one of the reasons why it needs to be updated, is that we now have intelligent systems, advanced driver assistance systems, which are increasingly coming onto the market. The main ones being intelligent speed assistance, ISA, and autonomous emergency braking, AEB. And we're seeing now in the European Union, for example, it's now mandated for all new vehicles as of July this year, new models already, that they have an advisory ISA in the car for drivers. China has legislated for AEB. The US has a voluntary agreement with car makers, but is looking at rulemaking for AEB. India is also looking at this. So this is an expanding issue, and we're seeing more and more vehicles that are required to have these ADAS systems. Well, that's good news, because these systems do work. We know that, for example, if you have AEB, which is braking, sort of automatic braking, if something stops in front of you or comes out onto the road in front of you, we know, and the manual points out, that you have around a 40% reduction in rear-ender crashes for vehicles that have AEB. EU studies have shown that ISA has huge potential to reduce traffic fatalities and injuries. Something like 28% fewer fatalities could be achieved if all vehicles had the tougher form of ISA, the haptic form of ISA. So there's great potential there. We as safety campaigners need to keep the pressure on legislators and on the car industry to make sure that these ADAS systems are adopted as quickly as possible and effectively as possible. In the EU, for example, The final legislation allowed only the minimum advisory audible warning in cars. We hope that most manufacturers will go beyond that, so the haptic pedal ISO, which actually sort of physically sends a signal to the driver that they're speeding, and is also less annoying than the audible. So it's these kind of issues that need to be worked on, legislated, advocated for. We are seeing some innovative ways of using ISA. For example, New York City has just received 30 million in federal funds to enable it to equip its municipal fleet, 2,000 vehicles, with ISA. The District of Columbia in the US has just adopted a first-in-the-nation law, which will allow for mandatory ISA in the vehicles of recidivist speeders. Here in London, Transport for London has been an early adopter of ISA. When it put ISA in its bus fleet, it found that between 97 and 99% of the vehicles kept to the speed limit, and I think the other 1% was related to sort of gravity on steep hills. So it's very effective. And on its municipal fleet, around 62% reduction in speeding incidents. So we know that this works. We know that it can work, and we need to accelerate its use. One key issue, which I think probably relates to the next sort of speaker, is that these things work best when you have good information for GPS satellites or for in-camera cars to latch onto. So we need to make sure that speed limits are set properly, speed signs are clear, the speeds reflect the real conditions of the road rather than sort of 85th percentile or what people are used to doing on the road. And I think for countries that don't think they're going to get to the sort of EU type legislation anytime soon, there's still a lot that can be done by making sure that your speed laws are up to standard, that speed limits are reduced in urban areas, that you look at speed limits in rural areas, motorways, get it all right, get it mapped, and then when ISA does come, you'll be fit and ready to realize the benefits. So I think it's a great example of how in the safe system, speed management, all these bits work together as a jigsaw, and the ISA is only going to be as good as the environment, both the physical environment and the policy environment that it's interacting with. That's what I wanted to say, and thanks very much. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sol. Our next speaker is Saeed Dada, who is the head of the Global Road Safety Facility and the Global Lead for Road Safety at the World Bank. Saeed, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Jonathan, Benji, and colleague. Am I audible? Yeah?
Yes.
Thank you. Thank you very much. It's a great pleasure to come and attend this launch of this guide, the manual. As you know, a bit of history, some of you already on this call may know, but it will be good to go a bit of history, the genesis of this so-called the green manuals. Back after the World Report of 2004 of WHO and the World Bank, the Global Road Safety Facility was established at 2006, and with the generous support of the World Bank and also FIA Foundation, who was a founding donor at that time. Then what happened is we tried to build coalition and partnership. There was not much partnership around road safety globally before that time. So we start working with WHO, with GRSP, with FIA Foundation. And this is the reason you see the 4 institutions on the green manual at that time. There was a series of them. There was one manual that didn't make it to that series, but it was part of that discussion. So I want to highlight that with the Road Safety Management Capacity Reviews that GRSF has published in 2009, the first edition, 2013. We are now also, similarly to updating the green manual, we're updating our road safety capacity review guidelines, and we will have hopefully a 2024 edition. As we understand, these manuals really were very important. Why they were very important? Because there were many, in some of the topics, they were the only type of this global advocacy and policy tools that existed for developing country, whether on the speed, on the seat belt, on the helmet, on the, and then later on, there was also the cycling. It's very important that after all these years, many things have changed, and thanks to our partners, and thanks also to Bloomberg Philanthropies, it was maybe about time to have a new revision of this manual. All of them has been updated. This one also has been released recently, and we are happy now to have that launch, a formal discussion around it. For me, I don't want to repeat what my colleagues have said on the enforcement, on the important on the vehicle technology, and thank you, Sol, for always bringing this information on vehicle safety and the importance of how low and middle income countries can get ready when this technology would eventually come to their countries. Let me just highlight a couple of points. The first point, which has been highlighted in the manual, but maybe because the manual is general, it didn't have time to go maybe into deep. So let me go into the infrastructure bit. One of the interventions says that the infrastructure has to be built, rebuilt, or reconfigured to be commensurate with any new speed limit. This is a very important topic. And this topic is not new. It goes back to the Dutch sustainable safety principles, where the roads has to be self-explanatory, has to be forgiving. In this case, it has to be self-enforcing as well. Whether the speed, and here we are talking about, we often talk about speed in the context of reducing speed, but let's not miss also when the speed is high on highways. Also, the infrastructure has to be commensurate with that high speed, which means has to be forgiving. If somebody end up with an error, he should not be paid his life for that error. This is the core principle of what we know as safe system approach. People make mistake. So this the configuration of the road is very, very important. It's not just about putting a speed limit sign. The road is overnight becoming 70. Next day, somebody bring a speed limit sign and it's 50. It's very important that the environment, the land use, the place and movement framework, and here soon the facility, I think, you have already known that soon we'll be launching with our colleague from the World Resource Institute a more detailed guideline on how to set speed limits. So keep tuned for that. It's very important. The other thing we are seeing, and there's still a gap, a bit of the knowledge. So we know what to do in developed country, and most of these measures has been tested. However, many times the same intervention have to be a bit adjusted for developing country. We cannot just take the same intervention because it worked in high income country. It's going to work in low income country, especially that the road mix is totally different. So here it's not really about the safety of the vehicle driver and passengers, which is mostly what the research in high income countries is about. Here is about the safety of the vulnerable road users, the people who are outside the car, pedestrian, motorcycle. So how we design a safe speed environment which cater for these vulnerable road users, which are the majority of the fatalities and serious injury in low income country. There is a big gap in this, and the facility has been trying to do some of the research or fund some of the research over the years. Hopefully we will continue to do so. It's very important area. It's not very clear the relationship all the time can be transferable. We need to come up with some new research evidence, and this is hopefully the facility in the next few years is committed maybe to do some of this research on how speed really works in low and middle income countries. Finally, I think some of you may have mentioned before, and I've seen it in the comments. Speed management is not so much about physics and science and engineering and intervention. It is about that, but it's a lot about politics and getting really the population really to embrace any change in speed. And we've seen some parties, political parties, has been labeled, this party is with this speed limit, this party is with this speed. So you can tell the topic end up with a very political discussion. So we need also, and there's a good question, how really do we make that work? We don't have the straight answer, but the more evidence-based, the more co-benefits are coming now. It's not only about safety, it's about health, it's about air pollution, it's about well-being of the society, especially in cities and urban areas. It's about climate change also. So we need to bring this broader discussion into the speed limit, so we don't just limit it into a speed, travel time, safety discussion, which unfortunately does not take us very well with politics. So I think many countries have done that. Recently, many countries has been going for the 30 in urban areas, and you can tell there is lots of tension and there is a lot of, but some of them have succeeded. Some of them in the bill of reducing, they have done a thorough co-benefit analysis. on how the reduction of the speed limit is gonna benefit the society. It's 5, 10, 20 minutes of travel time. And even if you lose 30 seconds, you are gonna put that accumulate in a huge benefit, whether in health, you know, the health, the cardiovascular diseases, the air pollution, pulmonary, and needless to say, the road safety aspect. So it's very good also to have a discussion with the politician. What are we talking about? It's not just we are reducing speed limit, then everybody will slow down and will end up with the congestion. I think there's a bit of myth around that. Engaging also with the politician is very important. I know many of us are technocrat, don't get that maybe that opportunity to always engage, but whoever of you who has the opportunity of engaging, it's very good to have in his back of his mind. If I'm talking to a politician about speed and I have 2 minutes in an elevator with him, what I'm gonna tell him in 2 minutes? So it's very important to be ready for that discussion because it happens very quickly. In the World Bank, of course, we have the advantage because we are at the core of the development financing and we meet with the politicians sometimes, whether the Minister of Health, Finance, secretaries. We have that discussion all the time. And many of our policy loans now are including road speed related policy trigger. The bank has a policy loan instrument where we pay against some policies. And I would be happy to inform you that recently there has been an instance where some of these policies are related to speed management, because at the end it's a lot about policy and not so much about the investment itself. However, the investment has to follow the policy, and there is a need for a lot of investment. Don't underestimate the investment that is needed to redesign, especially either the vehicle or the infrastructure to meet whatever the policy is saying about the speed limit. It's not just we put a policy of 30 kilometers in urban area and everything is gonna be 30. No, it requires a lot of policies. Wales has done a good work, which we are trying to learn a bit more. They have recently passed a 30 kilometer. They have done a thorough analysis on cost benefit, and it was not an easy discussion. So hopefully at some point we will report back to our partners on that experience. And I will leave you here. Thank you very much. And I would like to congratulate again my colleague in the facility, but also the partners, GRSP, WHO, FIA Foundation, and Bloomberg Philanthropies, of course, who has been a keen partner and the funder of many of these analytical work, which are very important to advance road safety in low and middle income country. I hope to see you all at Transforming Transportation. It's coming in a few weeks, and please stay tuned for our other event or launch. And thank you very much, and all the best. Thank you.
Thank you, Saeed. With that, I'll now give the floor to the three primary authors of the second edition of the Speed Management Manual. Alina Burlaku, Blair Turner, and Eva Eichinger-Will. Alina, Blair, and Eva are all road safety experts with decades of combined experience in the field. Before I hand it over to the authors for the technical presentation, just a quick housekeeping update that if you have any questions for the speakers during the Q&A session, please write them directly into the chat box because we don't have a Q&A specific box in this webinar. So with that, Alina, Blair, and Eva, I give you the floor.
Thank you so much, Benji. Hello, everyone. Very nice to see so much engagement and in the chat and so many questions. I hope you will enjoy the next, let's say, 25-30 minutes where we're going to deliver a bit more of a technical presentation on what the actual updates of the second edition of the Speed Management Manual are. Before that, let me briefly introduce myself and the authors for the manual. My name is Alina Burlaku, and I'm a senior transport specialist with the World Bank Global Road Safety Facility, and have been working on road safety for more than 15 years now, with my PhD on road safety engineering, and I'm very excited and very passionate on this topic. Over to my colleague Eva and then Blair to introduce themselves. Eva, Blair, I think you're still muted.
Hi, my name is Eva Eichinger-Will. I'm a senior road safety consultant for the World Bank and UNECE, and I share the same passion for road safety Alina has, and I'm sure Blair as well. I've been working in road safety for almost 20 years, in road safety engineering as well as in capacity building, and I'm so excited to present you today this really, really important topic of speed management.
Thanks, Alina and Eva. Yeah, Blair Turner, consultant with the World Bank's Global Road Safety Facility. Currently based in Australia, so it's quite early morning here for me, but it's my great pleasure to join you all and discuss what I think is a critical subject in road safety. I've been in road safety for about 30 years. Much of that time I've done research and policy development around road infrastructure and speed. And in fact, I was one of the original team members who wrote the first version of this this manual many years ago. But I'm very excited by the changes we've made, the updates that have been made to this current document, and looking forward to telling you more about that in a moment. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Blair. And yes, I'm actually connected from Washington, D.C. So you can see even from the three of us, we are all connected from different parts of the world. I will not insist so much on the green series of the road safety manuals. It's just I wanted to just highlight the partnership between the World Health Organization, the World Bank, FIA Foundation, and the Global Road Safety Partnership for the production of this series of good practice manuals following the World Report on Road Traffic Injury Prevention in 2004, which was a turning point in terms of addressing road safety. And all these manuals, helmets, drink driving, seat belt and child restraint, and including, of course, speed management, they've been updated in the past couple of years. And because we know, first of all, we know that since the series of manuals was first published, the scientific evidence base relating to various risk factors and the effectiveness of interventions have continued expanding. Contemporary research has refined our knowledge about specific risk factors, such as distracted driving, and also vehicle impact, speed, and risk of death for pedestrians. At the same time, new issues and practices have arisen, such as tropical helmet standard and an anti-braking control standard for motorcycles. New and existing interventions have been implemented and also evaluated, while increasing application, especially in low and middle income countries. And research attention and policy response have also increasingly been applied to emerging road safety issues, including e-bikes, drugs other than alcohol, fleet safety, urban mobility, micromobility options, air and noise pollution, and also public transport and technological advances. But I think one of the questions that is on everyone's mind, why was this second edition necessary? And the short answer is basically as a result of these developments, the good practice manuals required revision so that they can continue to be key references for road safety policy implementation and research. This is particularly important given the emphasis placed on road safety within the framework of the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development, and also because of the global impetus to reduce road death and injuries for the first decade of action, but also for the second decade of action for road safety, 2021 to 2030. And the manuals have been revised to reflect these developments as they continue to be valuable resources, providing evidence-based and cost-effective solutions to save lives and reduce injuries. An extensive literature review has informed the revision and updating of all the manuals, and additional information has been collated to allow more contemporary case studies to be showcased. In addition, the need to broaden the topics covered in the manuals to include aspects such as qualitative research methods and participatory approaches to designing and evaluating interventions was also identified. An emphasis on shifting traditional thinking away from blaming road users towards more contemporary frameworks, such as the safe system approach, is basically key in the revised manuals. A review of the evidence on risk factors and interventions was conducted for revision of this manual, and the review utilized text mining techniques to gather evidence on risk factors and outcomes of interventions. This technique creates computational algorithms for reading and extracting tests from a large volume of information in a very short period of time. The review also, I want to mention that the review that was done was limited to January 2008 up until December 2019, with the understanding that the previous version of the manual, the first edition, had drawn on the evidence that existed before January 2008. And only papers in English, French, Portuguese, and Spanish were included in the literature review. And the studies excluded were those presented in conference proceedings, editorials, and draft papers. As you can see, a brief summary, we had the full search generated over 1,390 abstracts relevant to speed management, which were screened to produce 42 full studies for critical review for this manual. And ultimately, 37 of these studies were considered in the manual. Basically, the two experts and acknowledged in the manual that conducted the literature review categorized the effectiveness of speed management interventions, and this is extremely important, into the following groups: proven, promising, insufficient evidence, ineffective, and potentially harmful. And this is all based on existing best practices in road safety. I hope you can all have access right now to the manual. I did post the link in the chat, and I hope it's working for everyone right now. One of the things that I want to highlight before we go more in depth on the technical content of the manual is the fact that it still acknowledges, as it was mentioned by our speakers early on, that speed management, the management of speed, remains one of the biggest challenges facing road safety practitioners around the world, and calls for a unified, long-term, multidisciplinary response. We know road safety is challenging, but speed management is even more challenging. So I will be handing over further on to my colleague Eva to let you more, to inform you more about what's new in the manual. Eva, over to you.
Thank you very much. I'm sure you're pretty excited to see what is actually new in the second edition of the Speed Management Manual. So let's look into the main updates together. The whole manual is now based on the safe system approach and on safe system survivable speeds. These are speeds that are safe for all road users. The manual contains the latest knowledge, not only on the many road safety benefits of managing speed, but puts a strong focus on the broader benefits, on the environment, on health, livability, and travel times. Furthermore, it contains much information on speed management interventions that really work, and it shows what doesn't work that well. Everything here is based on solid evidence and might hold some surprises for you, as Blair will show you later on. But selecting the right intervention is not enough. They also need to be implemented, and the manual shows you how pilot projects can help you with the implementation and why engaging communities can be such a game changer. And of course, there is much, much more than we can present during this webinar. So make sure that you check out the whole manual and download it for more details. If you look at the next slide, we can see a little bit closer what's in the safe system approach. If you could just change quickly to the next slide, please, Alina. Let's look at the safe system approach. It was mentioned by pretty much all of the previous presenters. So why is that? Because the safe system approach is the state of the art of managing road safety worldwide. And speed management is at the heart of any safe road system. Why? Because there is a clear relationship between impact speed and fatality probability. In addition, speed is the only risk factor that influences crash severity, crash likelihood, and crash exposure. And if we look into a little bit more detail on the next slide, please, we can see that in a crash, a human body can take only so much physical force before it is injured, and the chance of survival or avoiding serious injury decreases rapidly above certain impact speeds. These impact speeds are shown here. For vulnerable road users, for example, as we already heard, such people who are walking, using wheelchairs, cycling or motorcycling, that survivable speed is about 30 kilometers per hour. And in a head-on collision involving two cars, such a situation might occur, for example, on a non-divided rural road. It's about 7 kilometers per hour. And everything that we present in this updated manual circles around these safe system survivable speeds. If we look on the next slide, we can see that speed-related road traffic deaths form a significant proportion in all road traffic deaths, not only in high-income countries, but especially in low and middle-income countries. Research shows that this proportion is even higher than we previously thought. For example, in New Zealand, speeding is involved in around 60% of fatal crashes, and in India, almost 70% of road traffic deaths are caused by speeding. Thus, speed is at the core of the road crash injury problem worldwide and the top contributing factor in fatalities and serious injuries. The graph that we see on the slide shows the so-called Nielsen power law, which connects changes in speed to changes in crashes. As we see an increase in average speed of only 5%, for example, from 50 kilometers per hour to 52 kilometers per hour, leads to about a 10% increase in all injury crashes and a 20% increase in fatal crashes. But the good news is in this context that also the opposite is true. If we succeed to bring down average speed on our roads, only by small amounts, we generate really positive effects. If we decrease the average speed by just 5% using clever infrastructure interventions or enforcement, we decrease injury crashes by 10% and fatal crashes by 20%. And that's excellent news. If we go to the next slide, we see that the higher the speed of a vehicle, the greater the stopping distance required, and hence the increased risk of a road traffic crash. For instance, if you look a little bit closer at this slide, when we travel at 80 kilometers per hour on a dry road, it takes around 22 meters to react to an event and a total of 57 meters to stop. If a child runs onto the road 36 meters ahead of the car, the driver would most likely kill the child if driving at 70 or more, hurt the child if driving at 60, and avoid hitting the child if driving at 50. However, if the same child runs out on the road 15 meters ahead of the driver, the probability is that the child would be fatally injured at 50 kilometers per hour and at all higher speeds. In conclusion, the science is very, very clear. Reducing speed limits will prevent many road deaths and serious injuries, but there are many more benefits of managing speeds, as Blair will show you now.
Great, thanks, Eva. I think this is one of the most exciting things about this new guide is that, yes, we recognise the massive impact we can have when we improve speed management from a road safety perspective, but when we start joining our different agendas together, I think that's when we'll get some real traction. And there's a lot of questions and comments about this sort of political will for change. And I think this is one of the mechanisms by which we can actually start to make that change. Sometimes road safety on its own isn't enough. And so I'll touch on just three of the categories of benefits that are included in this new version of the manual. The first one is the environment. And this is a big topic globally. It's a big topic for the World Bank, particularly reduction of CO2 emissions. And we've known for many years that above certain speeds, we have a less economical fuel usage in vehicles, and that's also equates to higher emissions. And that's been known for a long time, but back in the 1970s, we reduced speeds in many countries around the world to try and conserve fuel during a fuel crisis. So this is not new information, but I think just to restate this again, that above certain speeds, perhaps about 80k per hour on our highest, fastest rural roads, we get to this increase in emissions. So, you know, if we reduce speeds in these locations, we can also get reductions in those emissions. The newer piece of research and knowledge, though, really is from the urban context, and the cities are where many of our vulnerable road users, our pedestrians, cyclists and others are injured and killed. And we see similar impacts in terms of emissions and a link to speed there as well. And that's particularly the case when we have rapid acceleration and deceleration of vehicles, which we often see on higher speed arterial roads. If we manage to lower the speeds and make the speed flow more regular without that intense acceleration, we've found the increasing evidence showing that that is a great way for us to reduce the emissions, including CO2 emissions. It's not only CO2, there's other benefits as well in terms of the environment, and some of those are listed here as well, heavy metals and carbon monoxide. So the environment's a big ticket item in terms of linking agendas, not just safety. But then there's also, on the next slide, we'll see some broader health benefits and benefits around livability. Lowering speeds, again, particularly in urban areas in our cities, has benefits around not just road safety outcomes, but also other health outcomes. The first one there is noise pollution, and traffic's the greatest generator of noise pollution in busy urban environments. And that has actually a link to poor health outcomes, mental health issues, and others right around the world. So evidence shows that if you reduce the speeds in these environments, then you can actually reduce noise pollution, which brings health benefits. But the other really, really important one is that, and again, mainly in cities here, that if we reduce the speeds, then we get a safer feel for the environment, and we get an increase in walking and cycling and these active modes of transport. And that's got links to some really important issues. It reduces the amount of traffic and emissions, but also it actually increases the health of those who take these active modes. So people are now more physically fit, less obesity, and less health issues that arise from that. So increasing active mode has very strong links to mental health and reduction in chronic disease. And then the other one there is around livability. There's greater community connections, improved access to schools, to workplaces, to other services when we have a more user-friendly speed environment, when people can walk and cycle to these locations. So the third category of benefits, and this is perhaps turning around one of the myths we see in speed management, and that is we often hear a major barrier to changing speeds, to lowering speeds, is that this will be devastating for our economies. It'll increase congestion. That is simply not true. The evidence is quite clear on this as well, that the increase in travel times and congestion are very, very small in most cases. And in fact, in some cases, we can even see improvements in the travel time of vehicles through a lower speed limit. That might seem a little bit counterintuitive, but there are various reasons for this. So firstly, we know already that in congested conditions, speeds are often quite low, perhaps lower than the speed limit. But what we often see is cars speeding up to make up time, slowing down, and they create these shock waves in traffic. And that causes the car behind to brake and people to change their lanes. And that means that everyone gets to their destination a lot slower. And the evidence is quite clear that if we create a more regular flow of traffic, we'll reduce that lane changing and those shock waves and create a better journey time. And so there's strong evidence, for instance, on motorways and freeways, where towards busy periods, we can dynamically lower speed limits, and we find that we actually improve journey time because there's less of these shock waves and stop-start traffic. So if anyone says to you, we can't change the speeds because it's going to be devastating for our economy, there's very strong evidence in this guidance document to counter that. And I think that's really one of the major benefits of this document, is the evidence for advocacy. And I guess just to wrap up on this point, the key point here is that we need to reach beyond our normal conversations and our normal partners when we talk about the benefits of speed management. It's not just about improving road safety, although that's going to produce a massive benefit in its own right. It's also got to have positive outcomes for emissions reduction, for other health benefits, and even for travel time. If we move on to the next slide, we mentioned that a lot of the research that was undertaken in this update led to better knowledge around the interventions that can be used. And these are covered, I think, very, very well in the new manual. Lots of linkages to good references, nice brief descriptions about what can be done to have the greatest impact. And they fall into different categories. And in fact, including now, which is in addition to the old manual, is the ideas around land use planning and making sure we switch to multimodal transport, public transport particularly. So that's an intervention in its own right that is linked to speed management. Setting speed limits we've touched on already. Said mentioned about the critical importance about modifying the road environments to, in some cases, manage speeds. Dave mentioned the enforcement of speed limits, absolutely critical intervention as well and highly beneficial. We also heard from Sol about the in-vehicle technologies and their role here, but also educating the population about the dangers of speeding and I guess generating appetite for change when it comes to speed limits being lowered. So I'll touch on a couple of these. Again, in a short space of time, we can't go through all of these, but just go to the next slide. There's a nice summary table which goes through all of these different interventions using those categories we mentioned earlier. So some of these are proven. There's rock solid evidence about their benefits. Some are promising that there's quite good emerging evidence. Others, there's insufficient evidence, and perhaps we need to either build our evidence base or be careful with those interventions. But also there are actually interventions we have been using which are ineffective. And you can see in this graphic here also some that are potentially harmful. So again, perhaps if there's time and questions, I can go into more detail about some of these interventions that are more harmful than good. But yeah, certainly be aware that not all interventions are equal. Some are far more robust and far more useful than others. And we need to understand this evidence base when we make our decisions about what to do. If we can go to the next slide, you'll see that the benefits are actually quite substantial. This graphic shows a range of different interventions as these bars. And this is actually the benefit cost ratio. So for every $1 spent on this intervention, so for roundabouts in urban areas, we get a $4.9 return. So for every $1 spent, it's almost a 5-time the benefits back to society. And you can see across the board here are these infrastructure, the enforcement type interventions, some of the vehicle interventions produce quite massive cost beneficial improvements. And you don't see these improvements in many other policy areas. I mean, look at the lane narrowing, 17 times the benefit from the investment. This is incredible cost beneficial work to do. So again, this is good evidence that can be put in front of decision makers, in front of treasuries about how to invest to get the best impact from limited budgets. If we go to the next slide, just very quickly, I'll go through some of the highlights in terms of interventions that we'd like to promote. You can see here raised pedestrian crossings. We want to encourage these low speed environments down to 30 km/h in urban areas where there's human activity. And one way to do that is to actually have a raised platform on which pedestrians can cross that also forces vehicles to slow down. So vertical deflection, horizontal deflection, these zigzags in the road, road narrowing to kind of squeeze the traffic down a little bit. It forces people to slow down. And gateway treatments. So when we're changing environments from high speed, whether it's from rural roads into, say, a village, or even in our urban areas from arterial roads to more local roads, let's mark that location, make it very clear that we're changing environments, like we do in that bottom right image on this slide, and put clear signage and use some sort of traffic calming techniques. Some of these are very, very cheap. Over to the next slide, enforcement we've heard about already, both manual enforcement and automated enforcement, hugely beneficial. There's whole guidance around the automated enforcement process that's been prepared and is available globally, that's referenced in this document. Sol mentioned this in-vehicle technology, this intelligent speed assist or speed adaptation. And again, this is something to prepare for those who haven't got there quite yet. But we are seeing in many of our World Bank projects this sort of technology entering into action. So bus fleets being equipped with devices that can actually monitor the speeds of vehicles or of taxis. And if they're going too fast, then the bus owner or the fleet owner is notified, and these drivers are retrained, and so we can improve their behavior. Or if they continue driving faster than the speed limit, then they may well lose their job. So these technologies, whether it's full developed ISA or some step towards that, are hugely beneficial. I'll end there and pass back to Eva to talk more about some of the guidance around implementing some of these interventions and processes around speed. Thanks.
Thank you, Claire. So we see that the second edition of the manual clearly shows us what works and what doesn't. So let's see what we actually need to do to bring these necessary interventions actually onto our roads. Maybe you know Peter Drucker is widely regarded as the greatest management thinker of all times. He said that you can't manage what you can't measure. And this is certainly true. So data is our power also in convincing the public and in convincing political stakeholders. We need reliable road safety data and crash data to define problems, to identify risk factors and priorities, to develop strategies, and to set and monitor targets. And in this context, you might want to have a closer look at the tools we provide on the GRSF Speed Management Hub, which might be helpful for you to collect and evaluate speed data. But we always must keep in mind that incomplete or even non-existent data must not stop us from implementing measures where speed problems are obvious. For example, if we look at urban locations and think back at the safe system survivable speeds, if we have urban locations with many vulnerable road users where speeds are higher than 30 kilometers per hour, we don't even need data to know that something needs to be done to bring speeds down. If we look at the next slide, in terms of implementation, we can also always use the power of pilot projects. Pilot projects come in very handy and are helpful if you want to introduce new interventions in a country, in a region, or in a city. A tip from our side is to select pilot locations where the strategic impact of a speed reduction is especially high. And this is, for example, in school areas. As you see on the pictures, you can see a pilot project from Ho Chi Minh City, where yellow warning lights, refuge islands, school zones and pedestrian crossing signs and slow down markings were installed to actually increase student safety on selected locations. And this pilot was extremely successful, and based on this pilot was many more projects were rolled out because success could be shown by these pilots. With a pilot, you can show in a rather short period of time if an intervention is effective, and you can test, evaluate, and optimize new ideas, always having in mind the overall goal and, of course, the bigger picture and the longer term vision. If you look at the next slide, we had many questions also in the chat regarding convincing politicians, convincing the public. And this is also very important because we see that interventions will be successful if they are supported by local stakeholders, by community decision makers, and the communities themselves. And there is also really strong evidence out there that shows that many communities want lower speeds. It's not the case that communities in general want higher speeds, but many communities want lower speeds for their road environments. The lower picture on the slide shows a speed hump that was created by a local community on a highway running through a village in Africa because people were so fed up with the high speeds, putting their children and themselves at constant risks. But now over to Alina to see what's coming up next.
Thank you so much, Eva, and thank you so much, Blair. The work on speed management is moving forward. So we have the manual. As Said was mentioning a bit earlier, the team from the World Bank GRSF has been working with the World Resources Institute, with WRI, thanks to Bloomberg Philanthropies for their continuous support and for their funding. We were able to produce a guide to set safe speeds. So this would work as a companion document to the manual that we are presenting in this webinar. And the novelty of this guide to be launched during Transforming Transportation here in Washington, DC in a month, exactly a month from now, on March 21st. This new guide is coming up with a framework for setting safe speed limits and comes together, bridges together the safe system approach with a movement in place theory, and also comes up with details on how to develop a speed management strategy. At the same time, under the Bloomberg Philanthropies Initiative for Global Road Safety, GRSF has the role of hosting a speed management hub, which is an online platform under the GRSF website. So under this hub, we have a lot of resources. We've developed frequently asked questions around the speed, together with a series of myths that are being busted, with a strong, a rich library, and also a series of animations around speed management. We also have some new research going on around digital speed limit mapping in Latin America, and also around speed impacts in low and middle income countries. And we're also planning some further speed management training in many countries around the world. So hopefully you can access this platform. We're here to take more questions. I'm very, very surprised. I have my screen share, but I see over 50 questions and comments from the participants. Thank you so much for such a strong engagement. And I think I'll hand it over to Benji to further moderate the Q&A session. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Alina and the other speakers. We have about 15 minutes or so for questions. As a reminder, please type them into the chat box directly. I don't think we'll have time to get to all of the questions, but we'll do as good as we can. To begin with, we have a question that we received by email from Amongo Ndugu, who is the Executive Director of the Uganda Professional Drivers Network, who asks, given that many countries, particularly those in Africa, have low national budget allocations and limited donor support for road safety, what are 3 proven and low-cost speed management strategies that you think we should consider implementing first that will have the most impact? So maybe I can pass this back to the 3 technical presenters. What are the top 3 cheap interventions that will have a big impact?
It's probably the most important question when it comes to low-income country activity. You know, the budgets are low in most of the countries where we work at the World Bank. And so, look, I think we've seen in many countries, there's some very, very simple low-cost interventions that can be used. So I don't have a top 3, but maybe a top 5. Speed limit signs, number 1. You know, many countries where the public don't know what the speed actually is, and the police can't enforce in those environments. So, you know, that's a simple thing to do, and it is quite low cost to do that. I did show some of those low cost interventions and the benefit from those in the earlier slide, but we can't apply them everywhere. So let's start where the risk is highest. Routes to school would be a really good place to start, around markets and other places like that. So I think, you know, the low cost interventions are very well documented now, and we need to use them more. I think yeah, we've touched on the enforcement and vehicle ones, that they can be quite low cost as well. But I would just sneak in another one there. A lot of the changes in these countries need to be institutional. We need to show the evidence. We need to show people, and this is a free thing to do for a policymaker or for a person working in a road agency. We need to show there's an issue for a start. You know, we need to show that data. You know, 60% of the deaths are likely to be from speed in these countries. Let's make that clear. don't just show the numbers, show the impact on individuals too. So that kind of science and story approach is a very good way to tell people about the problem we're having, but then move on to the evidence about we know these things can be improved, and it can be done quite cheaply as well. So yeah, so I think that's probably a good package of things to start off with to get things moving.
And never underestimate the influence of infrastructure also on changing speed behavior of road users.
Great, thanks for that. The next, I'm going to ask a bundle of questions that we received around the matter of enforcement and also political will. So perhaps Dave Cliff, you could answer some of these. So enforcement is closely linked to the will of decision makers, as they often fear the backlash from the electorate. So what strategies do you recommend for a smooth transition to increased enforcement? And also, one of the main challenges faced in low and middle income countries is the capacity of traffic police agencies. And also, are there any methodologies that you know of to determine what the sufficient number of the deployment of traffic police on city roads and highways would be? How do we know, the right number of traffic police that should be out there?
Thanks, Benji. Look, firstly, in terms of political will, this is a really common problem. So there's a belief that road policing is unpopular. So in countries where there is a problem with corruption, which we know certainly exists with policing, ensuring that police get training, the fact that we address this issue with training in things like procedural justice, procedural fairness in terms of the administration of the law is really important. Put that issue aside for a moment. Objective data about what the public think about the speed issue and the popularity or not of road policing needs to be objectively measured. There's a vocal minority on the speed issue, the pro-speed lobby, if you like, who pretend to be the voice of the community, that speeding isn't a problem. All that we've got to do is train drivers better, which, as Blair highlighted, is complete nonsense. It doesn't work. So one way of capturing the true public perceptions about speed and enforcement is through a public perception survey. So what do the public really think about speed issues? And there's some very good pre-formatted questions in the ESRA survey that some of you will be aware of. So capturing that baseline information, so there's factual information about public beliefs about speed and the importance of it is really a good place to start. In terms of calculations on the numbers of police, that can be quite complicated. There are some formulas that we can use to work out the volume of activity required to generate deterrence. So, but probably it needs to be quite specific to the country. So perhaps we could take that one offline and provide information about that one independently. Those are the two questions I remember. Benji, was there another, or do they cover it?
I think that covers it for now. And if anyone has a follow-up, you can put it into the chat. So perhaps I can ask a question. Again, we received a few questions on the topic of vehicle technology. So perhaps, Saul, you could answer some of these. How hard is it for us to ask vehicle manufacturers to limit the speed by default rather than asking drivers to limit their own speed? And also a question about the feasibility of retrofitting intelligent speed assistant technology into older fleets, especially when in some countries that the vehicle stock is older. Yes, so Saul, if you have answers to that.
Sure. Okay, thanks. Maybe I'll take the easier one first, which is ISA retrofitting. I mean, I think my understanding is that retrofitting can be done. The examples I gave you earlier of city fleets that are implementing ISA are at least in part retrofitting. You can get basic ISA sort of audible warning systems for between, I think, 150, 200 euros. Some of the more sophisticated ISA systems to retrofit will be up to 2,000 euros, which is why for a city fleet or for a company, you need to have substantial amounts of money to be able to do it, but the cost benefits are going to be considerable, because if you think about the typical municipal fleet's budget for damage, vehicle damage, let alone if something terrible happens and somebody gets killed, then this is a worthwhile investment. I think for sort of the average driver in a sort of middle income country, ISA may not be that applicable, but I think the sort of people who are looking to get ISA are probably the sort of people who are driving quite sensibly anyway. So what we need to see eventually is what we're now seeing in Europe and beginning to see elsewhere, which is sort of systematic implementation across the vehicle fleet. And very quickly on the other one, I mean, this is the intractable question: why can't we reduce the speed of vehicles to say 70 kilometers an hour, 80 kilometers an hour? I think part of it is engineering, that engineers want to be able to build the best they can, and want to have high performance. A lot of consumers want to have high performance, even if they can't ever really use it except on a racetrack. I think part of the reason is that the sort of the big industrial powerhouse Germany, where a lot of the biggest companies and the most R&D is situated, doesn't have a speed limit on its autobahns. And as we're seeing at the moment, it's a very live and difficult political issue. So, I mean, that's a sort of slightly glib answer, but it all goes back to political will, I think. And if we could fix that and put speed limiters at least on every single vehicle, then you'd solve a lot of the problem. Thanks.
Thanks for that. There's a few questions about changing political will, and I know, Saeed, you mentioned this in your opening remarks. Are there any broad comments you could add on this issue about the hard problem of overcoming political barriers? Saeed, if you're still there, but perhaps you're not connected at the moment.
No, I'm still here. Again, it has to be engagement and building really a bit of understanding and engagement, and don't get anybody by surprise that overnight speed is gonna change. And more engagement, more preparation. Have also some of the group of the social society really be on favor. Get these people also on board. So it's a whole wide of engagement that has to happen over many years. This does not happen over time. So it's not a clear answer, but my suggestion would be we have to engage with these politicians the way or the others, and use all different means that exist. And I think that will give some help, I would say. Thank you.
And if I may just add to that, because we have a good example right here, how we've been working about collaboration. So bringing in, building on partnerships. We've been working very nicely, and the work that we've been showing in our slides from Ho Chi Minh City, for example, that's work funded by Bloomberg Philanthropies, with a great partnership with the WRI, with GRSP in Ho Chi Minh City, with the city administration, and we see things implemented. So it was about building relationships, building trust, is being able to share with communities the need, the latest research, start with pilots, communicate successes, and then be able to scale up to more locations. And what we are hoping in Ho Chi Minh, and the discussions were more around actually informing future standards adapted to the conditions in the city. Not sure, Becky, if you want to add something around the work we've done together in Ho Chi Minh, or even other cities, Bloomberg cities.
I do. Thanks, Alina, and completely echo everything you say around partnership and really supporting governments to lead this work and to own it so that it can be scaled and sustained. The one thing I would also add is the importance of working with your media and journalists so that they start to understand this issue as a public benefit and a public good. And so that when the government actually does take the right steps and either reduces speed limits or instructs the enforcement agencies to start enforcing or installs automated speed cameras, that the questions and the way journalists are reporting on this is not negative, but that these are things that are going to reduce crashes and serious crashes, fatalities, and injuries, and show that the public supports this, because we need this to be in public conversation in a way that's nuanced and understanding the public benefits of it. So working with journalists, with editors, and with media outlets is so critical to keep this both in the public agenda, but also in a positive way that understands the public health benefits of it.
Thanks so much. I think it's time for one, maybe two more questions. There was an interesting one about the best suggested actions to tackle distracted driving. Anyone want to chime in on that? Especially now everyone has a phone on them at all times.
Yeah, Ben, just quickly, yeah, there's a few techniques, and I'm interested to watch some of the new technologies as well. So we're seeing trials actually here in Australia, beyond trials now, for camera technologies and the use of AI for people that are using mobile phones in their cars. And that's received a lot of publicity, and it's changing people's behavior around use of mobile phones. But I'd point out, though, that mobile phones are only one source of distraction. There's lots of things in modern vehicles now, particularly that the screens in the central console have got, entertainment systems and the like. So this is an age-old problem. I think, some form of enforcement, but education is needed. It's not an easy one, though. I think we've got a lot to do on that subject.
And maybe just a final question, if anyone has a quick answer, a question about how boosting public transport can impact road safety by reducing the interactions between pedestrians and drivers. Is this something we should be focused on as well?
Definitely. I see Becky also with thumbs up. I think anyone from us can take that question. But as we were presenting also during the UN Global Road Safety Week this past year, I think it's a need to shift the mobility thinking, the pyramid, and it's crucial to take people. The aim is to take people from personal vehicles and create spaces for them to walk, to cycle, and to use public transport. The more people feel safer, feel encouraged to use public transport and use less of their private vehicles, it means a smaller exposure. So I guess that would be a very, very short answer.
Great.
Not sure if other colleagues want to add on that, but yeah.
Okay, so 1 second.
I do see a question. Not sure if we have 1 more minute, and maybe Blair is also the co-author of one of the guides from GRSF on incorporating safety into road design. So there is one question here that I see it is. I think it was just posted that the manual does not cover sharp curves that need to increase radius of highways, and the link between sharp curves and speed management. And I think Blair has the answer to that, but I remember even when I was, because as I mentioned earlier, my research topics was actually around how do roads impact road engineering and road standards impact safety. And actually the recommendation, not necessarily not sharp curves, but it's recommended. We know that curvy alignment is actually safer than straight alignment. Purely straight alignment, not necessarily sharp curves, and it always depends on how those measures are being incorporated in your overall alignment. Blair, I'll let you get a bit more details on this.
I'll try and be quick because I know we're short on time. And this was actually the subject of my PhD, was looking at driver behavior around rural curves, comparing experienced and inexperienced drivers. But look at, in brief, it's the out of context curves that are the most dangerous. If you come across a sharp curve and you weren't expecting it to be as sharp as it was, we often find there's a loss of control there. If you enter a gentle curve and then perhaps a slightly more aggressive curve, then we've slowed down anyway. So look, it's very expensive to reorientate the road network. You want to be designing your roads in the first instance to not have sharp out of context curves. There is a whole suite of interventions, though, we can use to warn motorists, advise them about their behaviours through these curves. including the lane positions and the appropriate speeds as well. So to retrofit, this is what we often do in road safety. It's best to design when we first build roads, but often we have some legacy issues to fix. So it's not gone into detail in this manual. This is more of a high-level advocacy document and broad interventions. There will be some mention in the new guide on some of the interventions at curves that can be used. And certainly there's a lot of global documents specifically on this topic as well, which I could share if people are interested. Thanks, Alina.
Great, thanks so much, everyone. So I know we're a couple of minutes over time, so I'll just share a few concluding remarks to close the webinar. So this manual provides updated and evidence-backed guidance on the scale of the problem, on the broad benefits of managing speeds, and what we can do to address a problem. So we encourage you to use this evidence base to advocate the speed management policies and investments, and to select the right interventions for your local context, and also to use data to plan and monitor progress.
Benji, you want to make it full screen?
Sorry, yes. And last slide. One sec. So looking ahead, we welcome you to join us at the Transforming Transportation Conference, either virtually or in person if you're in Washington, D.C. That's on March 19th and 20th. Also, a companion document to the Speed Management Manual called the Guide for Safe Speeds will be launched at the Transforming Transportation Conference. You can also keep up to date with new developments in the field of speed management by visiting the Speed Management Hub, which is hosted on the GRSF website. And there's also a feature there where you can ask a question for the team to then post the answer to that frequently asked question to be added to that list. So with that, thank you very much for joining us and enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Have a lovely day. Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.